Welcome to Transition, Obtaining Key Assessments and Developing IEP Goals. My name is Judy Weinstock. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Parles Reckham, and I'm here presenting with Denise Reckham, who's the partner at Parles Reckham. Before we get started, just a couple of things. If you have a question, just put it in the chat down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to address the questions as we go along. But it's also very likely that we'll not only take questions but answer the questions that have been coming in at the end after we have our presentation. I'd also like to mention that we've been doing several of these webinars, Parles Reckham. Each of our attorneys has been presenting throughout the last couple of months, and we have a couple coming up, one in which Denise and I will be presenting again on the IEP process and what to include in the IEP. So that will be on April 3rd if you're interested. And we welcome you to also check our website for other webinars that are coming out. Anyway, so I'd like to begin first. We thought that it'd be good just to give, even though probably you all know this already, we wanted to just give a background because we always like to go back to the source, so to speak. Where do these rights come from? Where does, we can narrow in on transition, but what is the authority that provides the obligation and the requirements of what the district needs to do to address students and to address their transition process? So we go back to the federal and state laws that protect children with disabilities or students with disabilities. One, we have a federal law, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is really the law that we're going to focus on today. There is Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, which is more in the lines of like civil rights legislation, which is talking about accommodating and providing access for children with disabilities and to not discriminate against them based on the disability. Where the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or what we call the IDEA, is prescribing that districts are obligated to address the actual disabilities and to provide interventions, special instruction, and related services to help remediate the disability and basically result in meaningful progress towards goals and objectives in the student's IEP. That's the federal law. Many states like New Jersey implement the federal law through its own state law and regulations, and that we have that here. And then those laws, both federal and state, are interpreted by state and federal courts. Oops, sorry, excuse me. I jumped ahead here. My cursor is not working. Here we go. So the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, I kind of went through this, but just specifically, the IDEA was intended to accomplish the following: that all children with disabilities have a free, appropriate public education, what we call in the biz FAPE, that emphasizes the special education and the related services that are designed to meet the unique needs, the individual needs of the child with the disability, to prepare them for either, and this is really important when we're talking about transition goals, for further education, employment, and independent living. So whenever we're talking about transition, we should have those three goals in mind. The mandate basically is to entitle all children or all students who meet the definition of a child with a disability to receive, again, FAPE, free appropriate public education, and what's called in the least restrictive environment. So what is a free appropriate public education? It's defined, as I mentioned, the special education, the interventions, and the related services that are provided at public expense. That's pretty straightforward, public, without any cost to the parent, and that meets the state's educational standards, and that it complies with what's provided in the Individualized Education Program, the IEP. And as for least restrictive placement, there's a continuum of this. We want to make sure that the child is receiving the specialized instruction, intervention, and related services and that they're able to make progress in the least restrictive environment. So that might be in the general education class. It might be in the pull-out resource center and related services. Sometimes it's not in the public school. Sometimes it has to be done in a private school in order for the child to make meaningful progress. Okay, so transition under the IDEA. The IDEA defines transition services as sort of a coordinated set of activities for a student with a disability that are designed to be results oriented. So the focus is on improving the academic and functional achievement to facilitate the student's movement or transition from school to post-school activities. And we're talking about post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, that includes supported employment, continuing in adult education, and as you see there, adult services, independent living, and community participation. It's based on the individual's unique needs, right? Like that's sort of the theme throughout the IDEA. And it's taking into account specifically the student's strengths, their preferences, and their interests. And this includes instruction. It also includes instruction, related services, all these this programming to address the student's strengths and preferences and how to transition them into these areas of development. So basically, we're talking about that the transition services would include community experience, which unfortunately during COVID, that was sort of put at a halt, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, and the acquisition of daily living skills, and the provision of functional vocational evaluation. That's a very important aspect of this. So when should transition planning begin? No later than the first IEP to be in effect when the student is turning 16. It can be done younger if it's determined by the team, the IEP team, including the parents, which includes the parents, to decide that it needs to be done a little younger. It's a continuum. It continues to be updated annually after 16 or after the IEP team decides to implement this. And it must include appropriate measurable transition goals. And that again is based on age appropriate transition assessments that are related to the training, education, employment, and independent living skills. And also transition services that are required to assist the student in reaching those goals.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in now, and we're going to move on to, developing appropriate transition goals, right? So as is the case with all IEP goals, which, parents have become accustomed to over all the years their child has had an IEP, the goals should be specific, measurable goals developed based on the unique needs of the student and determined by the age-appropriate transition assessments of the student in those skill areas. So for instance, as was the case when we were trying to figure out, let's say, a reading program or an ABA program for a student with autism, we're not just throwing stuff at the wall. We're actually doing assessments, seeing what the needs are, seeing what the deficits are, and developing programs based on those specific assessments and developing measurable goals to see, are the services that we're putting in place actually helping the student. It should be the same for transition goals. So it shouldn't be that, oh, okay, your kid is now ready for transition. We have this program, right? Well, maybe this program that they have is appropriate for the student, but we won't know that unless we go through, I mean, there are different types of assessments, obviously, because we're talking about different types of skills, but the same idea of developing a program based specifically on actual assessment of the child's needs and the goals that we're trying to achieve by the end of transition. So the assessments should be a combination of different evaluations that provide a comprehensive picture of the student's strengths, weaknesses, interests, and identify the areas that need support. Next slide, please, Judy. Thanks. So what are types of assessments that can be performed? So a functional vocational evaluation career assessment is really a critical assessment for a student, especially if what we're trying to put in place for transition is work experiences to help the student learn the skills that they need. So how can we possibly know what the student can and cannot do, or what the barriers are, without doing a comprehensive functional vocational evaluation? And that's not a pen and paper test. That is generally like there's different organizations that schools usually hire people to do these assessments. It's not generally done in-house, although I mean I guess it could be if they have the right people, but it's generally bringing the student actually to different work sites and having them experience things, also doing functional, maybe tasks with are there physical issues involved for the student that we need to think about? And can they do certain things physically? Also, there are independent living skills assessments. So again, when we're talking about transition, we're talking about children with many, many different disabilities and needs. And if the child is going to need support and instruction in daily living skills, how to cook a meal, how to, you know, organize shopping lists, or anything about independent living. There are also, again, assessments that can be provided, such as the Vineland Adapted Behavior Scale, or do life skills inventories. There are a lot of different assessment tools, but the idea being that the child, in addition to being assessed for vocational evaluation, we want the child assessed on their independent living skills to know, are there needs in that area and what are those needs? We also would like to do an assistive technology assessment. There's a ton of technology these days to allow people with disabilities to do lots of different tasks that they may need support in, and that support can be technology, and it not just for a child that may be using an assistive technology device for speaking. I'm talking about, there's a wide range. There are technologies for keeping a calendar and helping you figure out your medications. I mean, there's just so many different technologies. And so you would want to ask for an assistive technology assessment, so that when you are going to be doing the transition program, the student is going to have the technology that's appropriate to help them make progress and learn, and what they need to be successful. And then we have college ready assessments, because there are kids that are having a transition program to get them ready for college, right? So there may be a transition program to get a student ready to work, ready to live independently. Again, we're talking about a lot of different disabilities here. So for a child that is, say, has maybe significant executive functioning deficits, attentional deficits, deficits with how to advocate for themselves, right? Things that you think about, the skills that you would need for going to a college and getting a college education. So there are, there's obviously the college ready assessments, the PSAT, SAT, ACT, which do tell, when you take those tests, it does tell you all the different areas, whether you are ready for college or not ready for college. Landmark College, which is a school for students with learning disabilities, also has a very nice free guide to assessing college readiness. That's, you're filling it out for yourself, but it's a very nice, you can just, Google it. But Landmark College free guide to assessing college readiness, to see, the idea being, like, if you want to get somewhere at the end of transition, right? Like, the child has a goal to do something, and those goals are going to be all over the place, because we as human beings, we all have our own goals. We all have different goals. So one child may want a vocation and to go to a vocational school, and that's the goal. And another child, we're looking at goals for work readiness and being able to maintain a job. So, you really need to start with the preferences and desires and wishes of the student, and then think about what are the skills you need to get there. And I want to mention that, if the goal is college and the student isn't at a level, say from the PSAT or the SAT to access college because of reading or because of math or something like that, that can be part of the transition, right? Like generally, transition is going to be focused more on the skills that you need for the end goal of whether it's college or work or whatever. But my end goal may be to, be a mechanic, and I want to be able to go to a vocational program to learn how to be a mechanic. But my reading is so low that I wouldn't be able to access the material. So I need to learn, I can still keep learning reading through transition, even though not all students are going to be doing that, because if the student doesn't have an issue with reading, they're not going to continue on with that. But I think personally, reading and math, on a functional level, those are also appropriate skills to think about for transition, because they are integrated into our everyday life, not just not just when we want to study, but just to live life. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I wanted to just we only put two examples, but I wanted to talk through two different examples of post-secondary goals, and how those translate to an IEP goal, right? So here we have, as a post-secondary goal, after graduation, Denise will work 25 plus hours per week at a local pharmacy, with the assistance of vocational rehabilitation. So that's my goal. I'm a student. I have 3 years of transition, and my goal is at the end of that transition time that I have the skills that I will need in order to work 25 hours a week at least, at a pharmacy or similar type of establishment in my community, right? So a corresponding IEP goal may be, and again, it's very wide, right? Because we're saying, like, we've assessed me, Denise, and we've decided that I need certain things in order to get there. So one of the things here, a goal would be given whole task instruction and task analysis for restocking shelves at a pharmacy. I will demonstrate the steps in the task analysis with 80% accuracy and no more than one verbal prompt weekly by a certain date. Okay, so I have a post-secondary goal, which is my overall goal, but we have translated that goal, and this wouldn't be the only goal. There would be many goals, right? Because this isn't the only thing I need to be able to do to work at the pharmacy, but just or as providing an example, we've translated that into a goal for the IEP. And now the question is, what are the services that I'm going to receive to allow me to reach this goal? So in this case, it would be vocational training provided by professionals. And maybe they're going to start with, I'm going to have many different prompts, even many prompts a day, and then they're going to fade those prompts. And so the goal should be, like if this is the goal, the objectives may be that, first I will need only 1 or 2 prompts a day, and then, 5 prompts a week or a week. And then maybe it's going down to get to only 1 prompt a week. So again, we want to think broad to start with an overall goal, and then we want to break that into corresponding goals for the IEP, and then the services that will be provided to get those goals. So I'm going to go to another example now. Okay, so this is a community access transportation goal. Okay, so as an overall goal, again, this is my overall goal, not my IEP goal, right? After graduation, or Judy, this is Judy's goal, we made it for her. So Judy will be able to independently utilize public transportation, train and bus, including planning a trip with the transportation schedule, safely walking to the bus stop or the train station, safely arriving on time at her destination. And if she has a question, she will appropriately ask for help. Okay. So that's my overall goal. This is, a significant goal. This is going to allow Judy to have independence in her life. And I think it's very, very important when you're thinking about overall transition goals that you start with what makes my life fuller, right? So if Judy can't do these things, she can't go out by herself and go places, this is going to significantly limit her life. It's going to limit her opportunities for work, for community participation, for everything, right? So this is a very important goal. And the IEP is going to have to provide travel training and again, breaking these things down in order to provide the services. On the next slide, we have, corresponding IEP goals for this post-secondary goal. Oh, is it stuck? Can you maybe just press the on the keyboard, the next, like the little button for, oh, there, oh, okay, thank you. So community access. So these would be corresponding goals, IEP goals for those post-secondary goals, right? So Judy will independently access a train or bus schedule and plan a trip and demonstrate the steps in a task analysis with 80% accuracy and no more than one verbal prompt weekly in order to arrive at her destination. So we're breaking this out into, planning the trip. Okay. So that's one goal. Judy's gonna be able to access the train schedule, maybe now probably through the app. Or through the computer, right? We're not really, we want to also make sure that we're utilizing the ways that we utilize these things now, right? We're not giving the child an old paper schedule and having them pretend a trip because nobody's using that anymore. We want to use updated ways that people access information. So these days, when I want to go to the city on the train, I take out the NJ Transit app and I look up my route and I see what time the train is, if it's a direct or if I'm going to have to change. So we want to use the actual tools that the person is going to use. Here's another goal. Judy will independently walk safely to the bus or train station, obeying all the traffic laws. This is a huge, huge, huge thing. And this really has to be at 100% accuracy, right? When we're talking about a lot of these goals and, we put in 80%, 90%, but when you're talking about safety situations, like can I, and this may be even broken down further, Denise will safely cross the street and look both ways with 100% accuracy, because if I'm doing it with 99% accuracy, that's not sufficient for me to actually be able to independently have this ability. So, and the next one, Judy will independently confirm with one transportation employee that she's getting on the correct bus or train. So this is a self-advocacy type goal. And so we also want to think about, again, like the assessments, going back to assessments, need to be able to assess all these types of pieces, right? So there are kids that will not ask anyone for help. Okay, that has to be a goal. That can be a goal, even and should be a goal. If the child's not asking their teacher for help when they're younger, they may not feel comfortable asking someone, am I on the right train, right? So we want to make sure that we think broadly with these transition goals, and we think independence. What is going to make the person as independent as possible as an adult? And certainly being able to ask questions and confirm things with the employees of the train or the bus is an important goal. Next slide. Okay, so having appropriate transition goals and objectives prior to the completion of 12th grade is critical to ensuring that the school district and the parents understand the student's transition needs. Many students are graduated too early and do not receive appropriate transition services or even sometimes any transition services because they lack appropriate transition goals in their IEP. So um, if your child is going to need transition services, you want to start talking about this during high school, and there, it builds, right? So like in high school, the student is still doing their academic work, but the school districts, most of them do have some services that start in high school that allows the beginning of career exploration and things like that to start thinking about what transition will be. And, we've gotten over, many years, we'll get a call from parents, in the end of May, June. Oh my God, like my child, they actually think they're graduating, like they're not going to give them transition. And my child is not prepared at all for whatever is coming next. And I thought that this was part of the law, and it is part of the law, but it's not like an automatic thing. The child is entitled to transition services if they need transition services. So and it's not all kids with an IEP, because there are kids, let's say I have an IEP because I have dyslexia and I've been getting Orton Gillingham instruction. And I'm, mostly remediated, but I might still be getting some executive functioning help or extra time, things like that. I don't necessarily need a transition program. Like I may graduate 12th grade and be ready for college, and there are lots of supports that kids can get in college, kids with disabilities. They're not direct instruction anymore. It's more back to like the 504, like in the IEP, the part that says what are the modifications and accommodations, those are the anti-discrimination part. That's not the direct services. Those types of things continue in college, and our students in college are entitled to ask their college to have notes and readers and extra time, of course, all sorts of accommodations to the physical environment. All those things will continue. We're talking about actual instruction and, getting, improving on whatever it is that your deficits are. That's the IDEA, and that's only until you graduate. So it is really important when you have a child who you feel is going to need transition services, like no way is he going to be or she going to be ready for college. He's going to need a program that really focuses on college readiness or on how to have a job or any of these things. You want to start talking about it and even having goals in high school, and at a minimum mentioning it in the parental concerns that I do not believe my child is going to be ready to graduate after 12th grade, that my child's going to require um, a transition program to learn whatever the skills are that they're going to need to learn. So what happens, the problems happen, I think, when the parent assumes, oh, well, of course they're going to have a transition program. Like I learned about that. I know that's there or whatever. And the district is like, well, no, this kid isn't on that track. Like this kid's on we thought this kid was graduating, right? So you want to just make sure you're having those conversations as early as possible so that everybody has time to talk through what a transition program would even look like and what kind of skills you feel that the student would need, and certainly requesting all of these evaluations, during during 12th grade, in order to show where those deficits and needs are. So that, because that's the threshold. You want the evaluations, obviously, to put together an appropriate plan, but you also need to show the need for a transition plan. Next slide. So once the student does graduate, they're no longer entitled to special services. So if they graduate after 12th grade, then they're graduated. They're not still entitled to services. Some kids actually, okay, transition is 3 years potentially, but some kids have 1 year of transition. Some kids have 2 years of transition, and then other kids have 3 years of transition. This tends to not be an issue with very low functioning students with high need, right? So if your child, is nonverbal and is has a full-time aide and they're in an autism program or a multiply disabled program, and everybody knows they're getting a transition program. Everybody knows, I mean, you still want to talk about it, and you still want to talk about your child's desires for what their goal is, because their goal may be to go to college and people aren't thinking that, but we want to make sure that we're trying to give them the supports and the services to reach their goal, not just some outside goal that, the school is assuming for your child. Okay. But once the student does graduate, that the services are finished. So you can request a delay of graduation. I do want to mention that students who are going to have transition programs can participate in graduation. They just don't receive their diploma. They don't graduate, but they feel graduated. They go to the prom, all the things that are available to all the children without disabilities the children with disabilities are entitled to participate in everything. They just don't take the actual diploma, which they usually send to you after the fact anyway. So they go up on the stage, they don't get their diploma at that time. The diploma is going to be held and they're going to receive their diploma after they're finished with transition. The only thing really that potentially can be provided after graduation is compensatory education. There is, if the child has not received a free appropriate public education, and there may be a due process filed because the family feels that they did not get the services they were entitled to. Compensatory education can still be provided after the student has aged out and is no longer a student, but it's sort of a different thing. They're not necessarily having an IEP and getting that kind of services. Generally, compensatory education is going to provide a certain service. Like, let's say we think they didn't give appropriate reading instruction. So this compensatory services might provide a certain amount of reading instruction, either through a teacher from the district, sometimes they do it, or through some other teacher that they're going to pay. And that can be provided after the fact if the student is entitled to compensatory education. Can you go to the next slide, Judy? Okay, so I did want to just touch on, adult services and what happens after graduation. And this is also one of the reasons why, if your student does have a developmental disability, like such as autism, and they need services, it is very important that they're able to maintain the transition program for all 3 years till they're 21, because the services that happen after in adult services start for kids after 21. Like the state is assuming that those kids that need these types of services are getting the services from their school district until they're 21. So that which is the Division of Developmental Disabilities, or DDD, they don't kick in for services until the student has aged out of their educational entitlement. So sometimes we have kids with, say, high functioning autism that the school has graduated early, and now they're only 19 and and they're unable to do a lot of things. They shouldn't have graduated early, but we can't even get them services through DDD yet because they're under 21, because the system has assumed that the services for them are going to come from the school district. So these are so DDD takes over after the school district entitlement is finished, and then for the rest of the person's life, if they need these services. The services that DDD provides can include case management, residential services, adult day programs, vocational supports, family supports, professional support services, there are lots and lots of programs. What happens once you're start with DDD is you get a support coordinator, which is sort of like a case manager for, kids when you're thinking about the school age. And the support coordinator is going to work with the family to put together a plan for the person, a person-centered plan about, again, what their desires are, what their wants are, and to figure out what services they need in order to have those goals met. Again, very, very wide range of services, because you can be talking about a person who is not safe to cross the street and needs someone with them at every second of the day. And then you can talk about a person who can have a job, but maybe needs certain types of reminders and supports in order to be able to have that job. So again, the supports are supposed to be pretty person-centered, but they are more like it's not so much that they're teaching you after you age out of your educational entitlement. It's more like they're helping you do the things that you want to do. It's not the same, and it's not as robust as what you can get from your school district, because they are supposed to be giving you the services that let you make progress.
So,
Oop,
send it to Bevan, she says she has time on Friday. Andy says he'll make time for that.
sorry, someone got off mute. I just muted them again. Okay. Why don't we go to the next. Okay, so another organization or government division, the New Jersey Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or DVRS. This is another thing. It's an addition to DDD, and it provides employment related training and help, like job coaches and counseling, vocational evaluations. They help people get jobs, and then usually have some on-the-job training and assistance. But the DVRS services, unlike DDD, so DDD services are generally like, they are what they are. Like if you have something and it keeps going, DVRS is intended to sort of help the person with disabilities find a job, get a job, get training on the job, but then fade. Like their services aren't intended to stay. Like if this is a person who's going to need someone with them, an aide on the job forever, that's going to be more of a DDD service. There is an interagency agreement, so you can get DVRS and DDD at the same time. So that person may utilize DVRS services at the beginning, but that when that person fades out, if they still need more support in order to be able to have the job, that's probably going to come from DDD. But DVRS it's great. I mean, it's a really good thing to have, and certainly probably your school district will tell you. I mean, they're supposed to talk about this with the families about signing up for DVRS, so you should definitely do that. And also, between 18 and 21, you want to apply for DDD. The one thing that I want to mention about applying for DDD is, you want to really highlight the difficulties of the person to the largest extent possible while being truthful. So if your child is sort of up and down, right? Like 1 month they may be able to do more things, but then they kind of crash and they go into a sort of a lower period. And that's sort of normal for all of us, right? We're not like always the same. We can cycle through times where things are better and then things are worse. When you fill out the forms, the assessment tool for DDD, you have to think of when things are at the worst and you're not there. Like, think of your kid without you to help them at all, like they are living in an apartment somewhere without any help, and then answer the questions like from their worst day standpoint, because they're using that information to figure out what's, like, first of all, if you're entitled to DDD in the first place, if you actually have a need for the services, and if so, what your budget is going to be in order to access services. And I think like as parents, it's very easy to sort of get into a routine with our kids where like things are just normal. Like, and maybe you have a child who, when they were little, they wouldn't take a bath or a shower at all because they didn't like how the water felt, right? And then you worked on it for years and years, and you got to a point today where they're, 19 years old. And yes, you have to tell them to take a shower. And yes, you might have to scream up, hey, did you wash your hair or whatever? But like, this is a huge improvement, and a lot of work going into it from where you were. However, when you're talking to DDD and you're talking about showering, if your kid wouldn't take a shower at all, if you weren't there, like if they were by themselves, then they're not showering independently, right? So again, like, it's hard to think about your child that way because we always, all of us, and I have 3 children myself, we want to think of all of the best things and all of the hard-won victories. But I think when, it's really critical when you're filling these forms out to think, is your child doing, is independent is like you're independent, okay? You know when it's time to shower, you know what right clothes to wear for the season, for the, whatever you're going to be doing for the day. You're not going to show up to work in sweatpants, with a mask on your face, or, so like, I think that you want to really, really make sure that when you're filling these forms out, you're like as negative as possible, but not lying, obviously, like telling the truth, not suggesting that you say things that aren't real, but you want to make sure that you really get the right things. Also, so DDD services are provided or funded through Medicaid. So when your child turns 18, that since they're emancipated, they're not considered under your like financial picture anymore. They should apply to Social Security SSI. It's Social Security for people with disabilities. Similarly, with Social Security, you have to, they're entitled to Social Security if they can't work because of their disability. Okay, now that doesn't mean that they can never have any kind of job and that you're not going to be working towards them being able to have a job with whatever supports. It means that you're telling the government that your child, because of their disability, can't work like a person without disabilities. So if they've been working with support once a week for 2 hours at the pharmacy, and they say to you, does your child have a job? You don't want to say yes. Like you want to say you might say my child is working on job experiences with their school or something like that. But you don't want to call, even though in your house, you probably call it a job because you say, oh, you have a job and you're trying to promote that. Social Security is going to deny them, and then they're not going to get Medicaid, which is necessary to fund DDD, if they can have a job. And working at ShopRite, getting the carts is a job. Like they consider that a job. People have jobs like that. It's about saying, and even if you can, getting a letter from their neurologist or psychiatrist or whoever is the doctor, it's a letter saying that because of their inattention, their distractibility, their whatever the disabilities are, they cannot work as a non-disabled person and that they need government benefits. So that's the entry point. So between 18 and 21, you're getting Social Security and Medicaid, so that and then you're applying to DDD, so that at 21, once they're not entitled to services from the school anymore, they can transition into adult services. I think there's just one more slide, right? Is there one more slide? Let's see. Yeah, so I just wanted to also just additional considerations for adults, and we'll leave it at this. I mean, we do have, I think even on our website, there's a webinar even just about adult services and special needs trusts, but the being entitled for Social Security and Medicaid, which I said is necessary in order to receive adult services. Medicaid is a poverty program. So in order to be entitled to those supports, you can't have more than $2,000 in assets. So what families, do in order to assure that their child is able to, or guardian is able to access these services is that they establish special needs trusts for their child. It's especially critical to have this like in your estate planning, because when and to have estate planning even at all, because if you die without a will, your money goes to your kids, your spouse, like it, by law. If your child receives from you or from a grandparent or anyone more money, then it interferes with their eligibility for Medicaid and Social Security, which would interfere with their eligibility for their services through DDD. There are ways to fix it if it happens, because there's a different kind of trust that they can make for themselves to make sure they can restore that eligibility. But it's like a worse type of trust, because that kind of trust has to pay back Medicaid with any money left over when they die. So if you made a trust, say you make a trust and it says when you die, your money or your insurance or your, 401k, like whatever assets you have are going to go into this special needs trust. If there's money left in that trust when the person dies, the money will go to whoever you allocated it to. So maybe you have another child that you want the rest of the money to go to, or you have a niece or a nephew or your church or whoever. If they get the money, they can set up a trust, a similar type of special needs trust. But when they die, Medicaid gets paid back the rest of the money, until they're fully paid back if there's anything after that. But this is a lot of money, because when you're talking about the DDD services, they may be getting 30, 40, 50, 250, depends on the level, $1,000 a year. And so it's a lot of money to pay back Medicaid. So you want to try to think about doing estate planning. We have a lovely attorney that just specializes in estate planning and having a special needs trust as part of your planning. And then there's guardianships and powers of attorney. So powers of attorney, you may be familiar with, that you may have one yourself. I have one. If something happens to me, I have someone who can access my bank accounts and pay my bills for me, things like that. A guardianship is really more places your child back into the situation that they were in when they were before they turned 18. So when you turn 18, you're emancipated regardless of your disability. By law, everyone is just automatically emancipated at 18. If your child isn't able to make certain decisions for themselves, medical decisions, financial decisions, you can apply to the court for guardianship. And basically, it's not like, if you think about a 17-year-old, you're not like exactly telling them everything to do, right? Like, it's just that other people from the outside, they can't sign their name on a car loan or a mortgage or whatever. That wouldn't be legal. So it's the same thing. It's not like if you have guardianship of your child, you can force them to do anything that you wouldn't be able to force a 17-year-old to do. It's just more of a protection for the outside so that people can't take advantage of them. And also, if they clearly can't understand things and they're, in the hospital and they need a surgery, the doctors are unlikely to accept their signature on all of those waiver forms. And then you may end up running to court to get an emergency guardianship, because the doctors aren't going to do the surgery that they need, because they're going to worry about being sued, because then someone's going to say, well, they didn't understand, they signed their name to this piece of paper you put in front of them, but they didn't understand what the real risks are because of their disability. So that's the other kind of area where you really want to think about guardianship. So I think that is the end of the prepared remarks, and we'd be happy to take questions. You can either put them in the chat, or you can just, unmute and ask a question. No questions?
I don't have access to the chat room for some reason.
Oh, yeah, no one's written anything in the chat, so,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I know because we're taping this, we will not, I'm gonna cut the taping part before the question, so if anyone is feeling uncomfortable asking a question because of the video, actually, I can just turn it off. I think, hold on. Can I turn it off? Yeah. Hold on. No, that's the video, that's not the taping. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Okay, stop recording. Stop.